Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and patch 11.17 will be coming out to PTR very soon, bringing with it a ton of new changes, especially when it comes to add-ons going forward. As long as WoW has existed, add-ons have always been part of this game's ecosystem, whether you're looking to get add-ons for new visual changes for your UI, or if you just want to gather more information like all the different rares for you to track, the dailies and the weeklies you should keep up with, and also to be able to parse the massive amount of collectibles that you have from mounts to transmogs and more, as well as more competitive add-ons that help you deal with boss mechanics more easily, track damage meters and ingoing and outgoing damage, but also combat reminders for your class in order to optimize your gameplay. Though some of these add-ons, however, that were mentioned are actually looking to become baseline with a patch 11.17 with a massive UI overhaul that will likely be able to test on PTR very soon. Though at the same time as they're adding in-game add-ons in order to replace the ones we used to have, they also kind of want to reduce the reliance, or really the over-reliance on needing add-ons in order to be competitive when it comes to endgame content like Mythic Plus or raiding, by changing the entire structure of the game and some of the fight designs to make it less necessary for players to need add-ons in order to finally be competitive, which is a fairly hefty goal that they set forth for them going forward, and one that I'm excited to see how this one pans out. While we don't have the PTR ROMs available just yet as when we're making this video, I did want to take a look at some of the different add-ons that are planned to be part of the 11.17 PTR update. As always, if you guys want to keep up with everything War Within, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Quickly before we dive into the actual discussion, there's a good chance that by the time you're watching this video, in just a handful of hours, Blizzard is probably going to be getting the patch 11.17 PTR realms online. I tried to wait as long as I could to see if they will come up the day before, as I'm trying to record this video, so I could show you these add-ons, the in-game variations, while also talking about them. But don't be surprised if today we'll talk about the add-ons as well as what's coming out in 11.17, but the next video will likely be us diving a little deeper into some of the different add-ons that will be coming out in this next update. Starting with the first add-on on this list, which is going to be a controversial one, but it's a rotation helper. It is a tool designed and to replicate some of the different add-ons that have been existing in the game for a while, to try to give players an opportunity to give them some sort of an in-game resource to learn how to play their class. It takes the idea from the add-on of Hekili or Hikili, whichever way you pronounce it, but it's basically a rotational add-on, and what this does is it gives you an action priority list down below, or you can move it anywhere you want to. Like if you're in single target, it'll try to give you the buttons you should be pressing next, depending on the class, depending on the spec that you play. So if you're a Feral Druid, it'll try to give you how to use your cooldowns properly, when to refresh the bleeds, when to bite, when to start spending common points, and when to build them efficiently. And it really does try to help you out as best as it can to give you the most up-to-date priority for your abilities, your most best buttons available in that scenario, because they actually utilize quite a bit of sophisticated tech that kind of coincides with some of the guide writers, class discords, theory crafters, using an action priority list created by players that really invest a lot of time in those classes, invest time to making guides for new players to pick them up and start playing them at a more optimal level. They use that same action priority that's been very well developed over years now, and has been maintained for multiple seasons, multiple expansions at this point, to try to give you the most up-to-date and most accurate answer in every combat situation. And they're kind of trying to see if they can recreate this to some degree by making their own variation, their own version, to give players a tool for learning a class. Like take Feral Druid, for example, normally a very, historically, notoriously one of the harder specs in the game to play. There's a reason why whenever a new player picks up a class, usually players recommend, oh, try a Beastmaster Hunter, try a Red Paladin, try a Destro Warlock, Frost DK. They're much easier to pick up compared to Feral Druid, which if you don't play correctly, if you don't manage your resource right, you could really fall behind and your damage can be absolutely in the gutter. And they're trying to find ways for players to have tools to be able to learn a spec they've never played before, or maybe a spec that you haven't played in a very long while since a few expansions ago, but want to go and revisit. Normally players have to dive into class guides on Wowhead or Icy Veins, for example. Maybe we check out a 30-minute, 40-minute YouTube video that goes into in-depth rotational capabilities. You gotta download weak auras, you gotta get all these packages in order to get a class up and running. They just want to give players some sort of a tool that you can enable in-game. Very similar to the cooldown manager, how you can just checkbox it. They want to give players a tool to checkbox and using the Blizzard's APL, I mean, they literally designed the classes themselves. They should have a pretty good idea of how they should be played, more or less. Give players a way for them to start learning at least the very bare bones basics of a spec. Now, so far we know there's going to be two variations of this rotational helper. One is just going to be a button glowy version that will just have a glow around the button that's the most optimal in your situation. Whether it's single target or AoE, it'll actually adjust it on the fly, and it'll give players at least an opportunity to start, like once you mapped out your keybinds and such, to learn which abilities are the most important, depending on the procs that you have, as it's meant to guide players in the right direction. However, there's also going to be a second variation of this add-on, which is the controversial part of the rotation helper. You thought the first part was bad. This part is actually kind of controversial, depending who you ask in the community, but it's basically a one-button rotation. Essentially what it does is allows you to hit one keybind that adjusts to that best ability as the rotation helper. So even though while the keybind does somewhat play the game for you, as it makes decisions for which abilities for you on your own, it is also not meant to be optimal either. It's actually suboptimal, as this type of play will incur a longer global cooldown than normal. So you're going to be spending a lot more time in between ability casts and uses when using this type of play. Which means at high end, or even when you're really trying to get good at learning your class, this will not be a tool for performing. And as the key point is to try to make this like an option for certain players, while making it definitely the worst choice at actual competitive content. The reason why it's there is to give players that potentially may not be focused on performing their classes the best they can be. Maybe there's some accessibility issue where they need something like this in order to be able to interact with the game while doing majority of casual activities. Maybe there's somebody who loves the collectathons of WoW, right? Collecting mounts, pets, toys, transmog, all of these fun things, but they don't necessarily want to be the best at the game. They're not looking for the highest damage out there, but they just want to be able to hop on a class that looks cool, and they just want to start being able to press buttons while doing maybe some lower tier delves or open world content, or maybe some basic quests, and they just want to at least be able to kill stuff that's in front of them fairly effectively, sorta. It is an option that isn't meant for a large portion of the player base, but really for like players that don't really care about the combat aspects and maybe just be absorbed in a world and just follow quests and follow stories, but not necessarily follow combat either. Which overall does make this kind of a radical add-on, if I may say so. It is very different compared to what we've seen from WoW, and I think having some sort of like a very baseline learning tool in-game where you don't necessarily have to go to other sources, other websites necessarily, to at least start learning the basics of a class, I think is very good for the casual community. Or if you just want to start playing a class baseline and just learn it on the fly, but having some sort of tool to at least start guiding you in the right direction, I think isn't the worst idea. Having the one button rotation is definitely going to be a controversial take, but it seems like they're trying not to make it to be a default play, and definitely like a very niche type of play style where it's not meant to be optimal whatsoever. But I still wanted to hear your thoughts down below in terms of like a one button rotational thing. I want to see what it does for an Outlaw row, because I don't think that spec, I mean, with the longer DCD, there's no shot you're going to be able to play that thing at all with that button, but I do want to see if it'll actually have some viable capabilities in the future. Definitely needs more testing, and I wouldn't even be surprised if they ended up removing it if, let's say, the community really hated that as a feature. Now, another set of add-ons that's also being integrated is actually some sort of a boss mod add-on, and this is going to be a long-term process, but they're essentially trying to do two things. They're trying to integrate some sort of a version of DBM, a bigwigs, or weak auras that let you know when bosses are about to use certain abilities, and keep you up to date with all the different mechanics that are about to happen. Whether you need to soak left or soak right, or dodge this or that, those are the kind of add-ons they're trying to remove out of the game over time, but also change the game design at the same time. So they're looking to eventually over time simplify fights but make them more interesting at the same time. Keep the challenge but not the complexity for the sake of complexity. Make it easier and more obvious for some of the different boss mechanics and encounters by giving players tools to track boss abilities and timers they want to integrate as part of the base game UI, giving players more ways to be able to be alerted as for most important mechanics, or if something needs to be soaked, something needs to be dodged. They want to give players the tools to be able to realize those things better, whether it's like an alert or maybe some sort of a visual enhancement for certain mechanics, just so players are more aware of what is happening at the same time. And the redesign is going to be quite interesting, but I think it could also be really, really good, because there is actually one decent fight that me and my guild bring up all the time that I think they did a pretty good job that wasn't really heavy on add-ons or weak auras. Like, I can't imagine going through Nerva Palace and doing Brute Twister or Mythic without a weak aura doing the egg assignments. I mean, there's zero time to figure out who is going to which egg and breaking them quickly enough. You need a weak aura in order to be able to do this fight optimally. I mean, it was kind of a nightmare, and that fight would end up being redesigned completely if this type of change would take effect. But another good fight that I think is definitely worth bringing up is, and this is going to be a weird one, from Sanctum of Domination, definitely not everyone's favorite boss, Fatescriber Rokalo. He actually has a pretty cool mechanic where Blizz actually should be commended on. He has a soak mechanic like many other bosses out there, but the boss actually automatically assigns you which circle you soak. He makes a bunch of these circles on this rune that it sits on in the middle of the arena, and then players need to run over the rune to soak it before it explodes and kills everybody in the group. And while there's many circles to soak, the one that you're supposed to soak will have this big anima orb over it. So it's like really visually obvious to see where you have to go. There's 5 soaks, but one of them is yours, and you have to go to the one that is assigned to you. That was an example of an excellent encounter that actually told you visually what you need to be doing in that moment. And more of this kind of encounters could be implemented in the future to make fights more engaging, where you're actually having to look at the abilities and the environment to figure out what needs to be done, rather than waiting for a boss mod to tell you exactly what needs to be done, which I think is going to make the game potentially more interactive than ever. They also want to find ways to improve the cooldown manager, which has been fantastic. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but there's definitely some issues with it at the same time. It just doesn't quite, it's good. I think it's good on its own. It just does not quite meet some of those different details that weak auras might be able to bring in. Like being able to customize what goes in your essential cooldowns, I think would be amazing, because maybe you don't need like a ferocious bite in there or tracking the charges of brutal slash, but maybe there's some sort of a cooldown that's missing out of here altogether that is a combat based cooldown for a feral druid, for instance. The same thing goes for the bars. Like the bars, there's only for certain few abilities that go into the bars, and these are different depending on the class. But what if, like, instead of just tracking things like, I don't know, your Berserk and your Tiger's Lust, you could track your bleeds, your rake, your rip as a feral druid? How amazing would that be? And you could put it, let's say, over an enemy bar. So like, hey, I'm targeting a boss, here's the enemy bar, and you can see those bleeds ticking down on him instead of like this little icon with numbers. Instead, it could just be a bar that tells you when to refresh him. How nice would that be? There's so many good changes that the community have brought in as ideas, and they're actually listening to the community changes and are looking to implement them, giving players more opportunities for better timers, reminders, and even audio and visual feedback to add more things on your screen to let you know if an important class proc is made available or if a certain ability is off of cooldown, to give players a little bit more control. But they're also looking to potentially simplify classes or streamline them a little, because again, you don't want to have classes complex for the sake of complexity, and if certain mechanics can be made a little more streamlined while keeping the essence of what makes it good and fun and why people prefer to play one class over another, I think that'll be definitely a goal worth chasing. Another add-on that I'm thinking of bringing as a part of a basic inline is a damage tracker add-on. I mean, who doesn't have a details or use recount to the past or SCADA? This apparently is the one add-on that is used by just about everybody in the community. Out of all the add-ons that are the most downloaded, some sort of a damage tracker takes the cake above every add-on type out there. And players have been using this for a while, whether you play casually or competitively. I mean, everybody wants to see how hard some of those abilities hit. Everybody wants to see what is doing the most amount of damage for you in terms of what you should be prioritizing. Like Feral, all about bleeds and bites, baby. Gotta keep them up at all times. And they're looking to make it even more detailed than details by using some of the different in-game functions like Blizzard server logs to give you more accurate information. Because some of these add-ons don't really work as efficiently if, let's say, your allies are super far away. But if Blizzard is the one handling that on their back end and parsing a lot of these different combat logs that appear as you hit enemies and heal your allies, then likely they could potentially make a more accurate variation of this add-on addition. Another one that also struck out to me is better nameplates, and that's something that Blizzard definitely gotta work on. So let's say you're pulling a Mythic Plus dungeon and you're fighting multiple enemies in that pull, and they're just stacked all together, right? How can you tell which of these enemies is the caster? Or if you, let's say you're trying to target the turnip in this pack, and if in the Mythic Plus dungeons when you do a big pull, mobs kind of blend together, how can you figure out which one is the turnip? Is it this one? This one? This one? I found it. Hey, turnip punching bag. It took me a little bit though, but there's nothing in game that tells you, hey, here's the highlight of the most important enemy that you really should watch out for. Here's that important caster that's gonna use a cast that wipes out your group, or an enemy that will use a frontal slam and you gotta be very, very careful of him. They're looking to do things such as basically what Plater does, or what similar add-ons like that do, to give players an easy opportunity to target specific foes that you are looking to focus on. So as a melee, if you're looking to kick all the casters, you should be able to easily highlight and figure out which of these are casters just by some of the different nameplates available. The purpose of improving the nameplates is to find ways to highlight some of the most important mechanics in a dungeon pull or a raid pull, to give players the ability to target the correct targets easily. So that is definitely a goal that I'm super excited about, because improving the functionality a lot more, I think would help so many players so much more, just to be able to parse all that information apart from one another and give players the ability to at least focus on the right targets and see them a lot more clearly. Lastly, even though they are trying to find ways to implement some of these basic add-ons into part of the in-game UI, while also removing some of those add-ons, specifically like DBM and weak auras that track boss mods, but replacing them with a much better system and environment and encounter design in order to make things a little more intuitive, they are not looking to remove add-ons outright either, even though that is a topic that actually floated around with players thinking, wait, are they just removing and banning add-ons and just replacing the ones we've had? I don't like it. I like my details. I would rather just use that. They're not trying to necessarily remove all of them, and it's going to be a process until they eventually kind of wean us off of some of them, but it's not going to be like instantaneously, immediately done. It is something that will be done based on community feedback as to how successful they are with their own add-on implementation. But cosmetic add-ons, for example, that will stick around the game. If you have an add-on to track quests, to track storylines, you'll still be able to use them. And accessibility add-ons, like if you use a controller or any type of a controller to play WoW, all of those are still gonna stay. They're not removing the functionality of all add-ons, mostly just focusing on some of those what feels like mandatory combat add-ons that so many players feel like they have to use. Otherwise, they're just at a disadvantage compared to people that do use them, even if you don't. They're trying to find ways to design the game so you don't necessarily need some of those what feels like combat mandatory add-ons, but it still want to give players the creativity to change up their UI, to change up so many different things in the game, to use add-ons to track a variety of different collectibles and mounts you're trying to obtain, to track all the different rares that you're looking to farm out in the open world. All of those fun add-ons are meant to stay. They're really just trying to find a way to make some of the most mandatory, most downloaded add-ons a little bit less mandatory by improving the game's base UI and as well as encounter design, which I am actually super excited to see. It's definitely a hefty goal, but one that I'm definitely rooting for. And we'll see how they do once we finally get to test some of these add-ons on the PTR. But with that, as always, I don't want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. It would very much appreciated. Also, join our Discord community to keep up with all the regular updates, especially for the patch 11.17. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.